good. And might I say that you have the most colourful way of saying things. Very interesting dissection of the language. Well, anyway, speak with you soon.
Trying to get into the lore of Vampire the Masquerade can be a very complicated project. Where do you even start? It's a 30-year-old tabletop RPG system with a bunch of very different editions, conflicting views on which one is better, and on top of all this, an extended World of Darkness, with a lot more books, shows, and role-playing systems of their own. This can make the whole endeavor feel overwhelming. I wanted to learn more about this setting for a while now, and ultimately I just decided to play all the video games in release order and see where it takes me. I've only played Bloodlines before this, and briefly played 2nd edition in high school, my first ever tabletop RPG, so most of it was completely new to me. I went through all this in the last few months, and I wanted to gather all the things I would say to someone now who asks me how to get into all this. And it's kinda hard to explain, because these games don't always have the best reputation, and even if you haven't really followed the news about them closely, you probably heard something bad recently related to this IP. Or maybe you played some of them a long time ago but had mixed experiences. Or maybe you've heard of this IP for completely different reasons. But even in a more general sense, it's really interesting to look at these games in order and follow how a franchise struggles to get a strong foothold in the video games market. It moves through big hits and then some self-searching, and now looks to be back to its roots. So it's fascinating to look at it from the outside as well, but if you decide to get into it, maybe this will be useful to you to help decide which ones are even worth playing at all. For each one there will be a mini review, and I will tell you if I would recommend to play it or to skip it. At the end, I'll go through a few of the tabletop books as well, which I think are a good start for someone who wants to get into the lore outside of the games. But before we start regarding spoilers, I will not talk about any major spoilers for any of the games. I will keep the rule I made up for the Pentiment video. If it's spoiled in the promotional material or on the Steam page, it's okay to show it here too. This mostly means locations out of context, but in general, I will not spoil any of the stories themselves, so you can play them for yourself after the video. And with all the introductory info out of the way, we have a bunch of titles to go through, so let's start with the first game released for this setting. Vampire the Masquerade Redemption is an action RPG released in 2000, developed by Nihilistic Software. This is their highest rated game on Metacritic, since after Redemption they moved to mobile and PS Vita titles, and got lower and lower scores on their new games. They worked on StarCraft Ghost 2 alongside Blizzard, but that game ultimately got cancelled, so I'd say Redemption is their biggest title. Upon its release, it sold really well, which is part of the reason why we got the next game, Bloodlines. Nowadays you can buy it on GOG or Steam, and both versions run fine on a modern system. You don't need to install any mods to make it work, the overall performance is fine. You can play it in the original aspect ratio, but by default it will stretch the game to fit your monitor and it will look like this. It's a preference really, but most of my recordings are in a square format, so that's what you will see throughout here. Back around its release, people were generally impressed by the graphics, and even now I think it's easy to see why. The character models and the designs are all unique with a lot of individual personality, and the zones and the atmospheres are a masterful representation of this setting. If you like how this era's games looked, this is easily one of the best looking ones. It came out 2 years before Morrowind, for example, and I wouldn't say it looks worse, it's comfortably on the same level. But this game's weakness, just as in Morrowind, is in the animations. These tend to show their age a bit more. For example, the facial animations in cutscenes are like the Warcraft 3 character panels. So if you find this off-putting, it will be hard to get used to, but for me at least, this is most of the appeal of this era. But the character models are made more realistic with some cool things they do with the light and lighting. There are sections where you will have to bring a torch if you want to see your surroundings at all, and there are working mirrors too, which I thought was pretty cool. This works very well in dungeons, where you can be worried about what lurks in the shadows and be genuinely scared by attacking monsters. And the combat animations are very dynamic and varied, and there's a lot of different types of cool spell effects and weapon effects too that you can see during these fights. These usually have a satisfying sound effect paired to them. So the presentation of the combat is really excellent in my opinion. This includes the soundtrack as well. And it's also just available in MP3s in the game files, which was a really great surprise. What detracts from it maybe a bit is the one-liners the enemies and party members alike keep on repeating.
To the abyss with thee! To the abyss with thee! To the abyss with thee! To the abyss with thee!
Relieving thee of thy curse of woe. Come hither and hear the sweet sound my sword delivers. I shall let thee flee. Come hither and hear the sweet sound my sword sings.
There are also some animations that are lacking or straight up just missing though. So for example, you cannot pet this cat. If you don't like these graphics and sounds, there's a full remake of the game in the works, by the way. Reawakened is a mod for Skyrim that will contain the whole game of Redemption in a more modern package. If what I showed you here seems way too outdated, I really recommend checking out this mod. Anyway, so the look and sounds of combat are great, and actually playing the game feels really good. The first impression I got was that it controls like a third-person Diablo game. You click on the monsters and they die. So far wonderful. There is no tooltip for almost anything, and not a lot of systems are explained. Like leveling up, which one of these names do you like better? What do they do? Secret. But it's an old game, so what you need to do is open the game manual PDF that comes with your version of the game. Here, everything is explained in detail, so you can figure out what the skills do, the builds you want to do, etc. But honestly, and I know this is a hot take, opening a manual every time you want to figure out something is not ideal. For example, you loot an item that says its stats are unidentified. What does this mean? How to identify it? So you either stumble upon this skill in the game, or open the manual, read the disciplines, and read this one that says it can identify items. Or you find a scroll that says scroll of discipline's name. There's no description, so if you don't know that one, it's time to look at the PDF again. Maybe this felt good when you had the physical book back then, and it felt like perusing a tome for knowledge, but I'm happy we moved this aspect into the games themselves. I like it when these booklets contain lore and world building, but put the descriptions into the games. The UI in general has some outdated elements and missing QoL features as well, but overall I think it's fine. For example, the dungeons don't have special maps. If you press the map button in a dungeon, it will show you the overworld map of the zone you are in. And there's no quest markers, so you'll have to piece together what you do from the story dialogue and the few notes you get at the quest panel. Personally, I enjoy this more than quest markers, and you can think of this missing QoL stuff as added immersion. But I can see why someone who's used to the more modern games would be frustrated by this. So after you figured out your build somehow, it's time to go back into action. Before that though, first don't forget to pick up some snacks for the perilous journey ahead. I said the combat is like Diablo, but it's not exactly true, as you control a full party of 4 here, a coterie as it's called in Vampire. And for me, this is by far the weakest part of the game. These people are f***ing stupid. Their pathfinding AI makes them regularly get stuck on objects everywhere, and even if they make it to the fight, they'll most likely not help you very much. At least it happens to NPCs sometimes as well, I guess.
Attend! Attend!
The pathing of the character you control is always very nice, but you can only control one character from your party at a time, and all the others will be doing some zero brain cell tactics while you're trying your best. At least the faces they make while on 0 HP is funny. Their AI makes the game much harder than it needs to be, and you will have to play with this in mind if you try to defeat some of the more challenging boss fights. They had some difficulties during development, and the scope being overambitious was one of these problems. They had to not finish a lot of planned parts and cut certain elements from the game that they could not finish at all. One of the developers wrote a post-mortem about these issues, and it has a separate section for the pathfinding stuff, so they were definitely aware of this. In a fight, mechanically, you will just press down the left mouse button to attack and sometimes press the right one to use a skill, but that's it. Some fights require positioning, but not a lot of them. When I encountered a difficult fight, it was like hitting a wall, but most of the time it was solved by going back to upgrade my gear, and then it was very easy. Oh, and if you're really struggling, there's a secret way to solve all your problems. It's an old game, so there's an option that's not often available in modern games. You know, you could open this thing called console and...
To the abyss with thee!
But yeah, most of the gameplay during the story is watching a few long exposition cutscenes and then going to a dungeon that has 3 or 4 levels. Then going back for another cutscene and repeat. The story overall I thought was good, even if it was very cheesy. But most vampire stories are full of cliches, so I thought it was fine. The main character is Christoph, who was a crusader in the Middle Ages. He falls in love with a nun, gets turned into a vampire, and because the nun disappears, he starts looking for her. Half of the story is in medieval times and the second half is in modern times, so you will see a lot of different types of areas and meet a wide range of characters and enemies. The supporting characters and NPCs are very one-dimensional, but they are interesting and funny, sometimes intentionally.
I discharge your ass too.
Sometimes not.
We told her thou wert not among us.
I actually really like the writing, the stereotypical characters and the cliched dialogue, even if all of this was a debated part when the game came out. Voice acting is generally high quality, and I think they fit the characters really well.
I grow faint.
The hunger overcomes thee. The beast strengthens as thou weaken from lack of blood.
Accursed creature! Earth has no room for such as thee!
Verily, all the earth is all dominion. With every passing day our numbers swell. We shatter all defenses and corrupt all holy places.
Just a nightmare. I've got you.
You are not Samuel. You are Samuel and a triune entity.
This triune entity is Christoph, Pink, and Lily. Say hi to him.
We go tonight. Come.
What you might have noticed, and if you've watched my MMO video, you already know this, but I don't like the presentation of the text in the cutscenes. It really doesn't work to put a full, huge paragraph on the screen and expect people to read it, even if all of it is voice acted as well. And a lot of times these are filled with new terminology that someone new to the setting will not understand at all, and will be just sitting there and... Huh? In more recent games, it's always 1 or 2 sentences on the screen, even if the character is monologuing, so your brain can digest the information more easily. This is not this specific game's fault. Lots of older games did this as well, and it's just one of those things again that I'm happy we moved past. Even though sometimes I was quite harsh with it, I'd still recommend trying this one out. Especially if you have a nostalgia for these types of games from around the year 2000. It's dated, but if you can get past the hurdles or even like these types of limitations, it's a good game. It's $5 and goes on sale regularly for even less, so it's not really a big commitment either. Would I recommend starting with this as your first game of the setting though? No, that's the next game. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is a 2004 role-playing game developed by Troika Games, who you might know as the developers of Arcanum and the early workplace of some very famous developers. Just to help you in the timeline, some 2004 RPGs are Knights of the Old Republic 2, Fable, and Vanilla World of Warcraft. So a pretty good year, not even mentioning the non-RPG lineup. The game uses the source engine Half-Life 2 runs on, so the menus, for example, might be familiar looking as well. And it's published by Activision, so you might find some references to other games that later go into very different directions. After the success of Redemption, Activision wanted another Vampire the Masquerade game, but instead of developing a direct sequel, Troika Games dug deep into the lore and went after their own vision in terms of gameplay and story. It became a very popular cult classic over the years, and there's a million reviews on it on YouTube already. So I'm not gonna go really deep into it, I just try to give you some impressions here about this recent playthrough I did for this video. I think this was my 4th overall, and I played a Malkavian, which I never did before. Malkavians are plagued by visions and voices and all the mental illnesses, so the things they say don't always make a lot of sense. So throughout the game, all your dialogue options will be enigmatic metaphors or just straight up nonsense. Playing these first is not really recommended, as you will not know what you're actually saying basically ever. But it's a very good way of experiencing a story you already know through a completely rewritten dialogue tree. In general, the game does a good job of getting you into the setting of the World of Darkness through the dialogue. There are plenty of options that open up detailed descriptions of terms, places, and people that get you up to speed pretty quickly. And these explanations are just much more easier to find as a non-Malkavian, you know, when you understand the options you have. These lore dumps feel much less monologue-y compared to Redemption, and the dialogue feels natural and the writing overall is very good. It takes you to a lot of different areas and shows you conflicting viewpoints, so you'll understand the different organizations and will be able to form your own opinions about them. It's a great first entry to this world, no wonder it became so popular over the years. Another reason is that it looks really good. There's an unofficial patch that's still regularly updated that fixes bugs and helps performance on modern systems. I didn't really have any problems with performance with this patch installed, no crashes or bugs. I don't know how it is currently without it, but I really recommend installing it. It's basically the default mode to play the game now. You can play it as just a graphics update, but if you wish, it can also restore some cut content, so it's up to you how different you want it to be from the original. There's also a million other types of mods, so you can go pretty deep into it. You can control the game in first-person mode, but you can zoom out as well to see the character animations are well of their time again. But honestly, it's more endearing than bothersome. The facial animations improved a lot since Redemption, and the camera always zooms in for the dialogues, as in something like Oblivion, so you can really appreciate the animations and the character designs up close. Anyway, my favorite part of this game is the atmosphere of the environments. Walking around in this game is truly a feeling for me no other game has captured since then. Walking around the night as a vampire, always looking for an opportunity to hunt, the constant sense of danger, the hostility of LA by night, and the loneliness of this type of existence is all there with you while you're trying to find your way to your next mission. It really represents this mood perfectly. And there's an incredible soundtrack for every area. Rick Schaefer did the soundtrack, and I still listen to it regularly almost 20 years later. He worked on the original Elder Scrolls Online soundtrack as well, by the way. It's incredible the range he has. Overall, the sound design is always exceptional, and the voice acting is really good as well.
Greetings, Commander.
Gaze upon me and see reflected the contempt of your savior!
You rat sucker! Hey, I don't care what you do, but just so you know, polite vampire society looks down on that kind of thing.
You'd really be willing to do this for me? I won't lie.
It's gonna be dangerous. But if you got rid of her, I'd be grateful. Very, very grateful.
Another big part of the gameplay, besides the talking and the investigating, is the combat. In the earlier sections, combat is carried by the level design. They clearly had more time to build up these initial missions. In these, there's many ways you could achieve your goals. Here, on one of the first quests, for example, you can turn off the electricity and sneak in. You can stealth kill everyone, you can convince them to just hand you the item you need, or if you wish, you can just go in and openly start a killing spree. But the point is, you can choose. In later parts, specifically in the last section, the level design is mostly, here's a million corridors full of enemies on like 5 levels, good luck. But then again, remember the secret we learned about old games with Redemption? A little thing called using the console commands. It works here as well, and if the level is annoying you, you can just do this. Or God mode through it, but I'd recommend at least trying it out normally first, so you'll understand what everyone talks about when they say the last part sucks. But the first 75% of the game is really good. The writing, the missions, the atmospheres and the music, everything is very, very well put together, and those parts easily counterbalance the last quarter of the story where it falls off quite a bit. So overall, you've probably heard a lot about this game already and the praises of this game, and I'm here to add one more voice to the pile. It is indeed worthy of all the praise it got, and if you're thinking of getting into Vampire the Masquerade, this is a very good starting point to do so. It's based on an earlier version of Vampire Tabletop, not the current one, but almost all the things you'll learn here are true in the current edition as well. There's so much to do, so much to explore and see, so many interesting characters to meet. It takes you through the basics of vampire society, like the different clans, the different sects, other supernatural creatures, etc. And there's a bunch of mods to try out as well if you want to explore different aspects of the world. And the community had a lot of time to iterate on this game with patches and mods, as there was no other game using this IP for a long time. Tim Cain has a YouTube channel where he talks about all things game development, and one of his first videos was about the planned sequels for Bloodlines. Unfortunately, none of these became a reality, and shortly after Bloodlines came out, Troika Games shut down. It would be a 15-year wait until the next Vampire the Masquerade game, and it was the first in a series of very different games. Coteries of New York came out in 2019, developed by Polish indie game studio Draw Distance. It's basically a visual novel, but it also has a little bit of the role-playing of the tabletop games. You choose from 3 clans, and each clan has their respective disciplines to use in certain situations. These are the supernatural skills you can use to turn these events into your favor. For example, compel an assailant to stand down, or convince the bouncer to let you into a club without having to stand in line, etc. These disciplines increase your hunger, however, and if your character is hungry enough, they will go on a rampage. Do this more than once, and you're a liability to the Camarilla, the vampire organization you work for, and they will take you out and it's game over. So it is a visual novel, but you'll have to do some minor resource management as well, while you are choosing the paths you will take. And this game uses a one save file plus autosave method, like many other narrative games do, and the game saves after every dialogue box, so you will not be able to go back on your decisions. Luckily, at least there's skipping, and the game is rather short, so even if you get the game over at the end of it, by skipping through the game, you can get back to where you were in like 15 minutes. As it's a visual novel, you'll mostly spend your time reading, choosing responses in dialogue, and choosing which character to spend time with. The story opens with your character being embraced, that is turned into a vampire. They quickly accept their new life and position inside the vampire organization and start to live their new life. After a short linear intro sequence, the game opens up, and every night you can choose 2 people to hang out with. Your main goal is to build a coterie, as in the name of the game, which is a small group of vampires who generally work together on the same missions. You have a few characters to choose from, and after working through their questline, 2 of them will join your party. There are non-recruitable characters as well in these side quests. These are situations that give you background lore or just interesting events related to the main mission. Based on the Steam reviews, the main problem people have with the story is that there's only one ending. Whatever you do, the outcome of the story does not change. The way you get there can be significantly different based on your choices and clan, but you will get there nonetheless. I didn't mind this part, to be honest. If the ending is a good one, I can accept it being the same for everyone, and I really liked how this one played out. I thought it was impactful and a good conclusion. And I think it makes sense lore-wise as well, that the actions of some very young vampires don't really affect the higher politics of a big city like New York. There are forces that play way above your head, and I think this is an effective way of showing this. I really like the characters overall. They are interesting and memorable, all with their own motivations and backstories that are really fascinating to uncover. And the writing contains quite a lot of internet speak too, and memes here and there as a kind of Easter egg to find for people who appreciate this kind of stuff. I thought it works. It's mostly just endearing. It never really becomes obnoxious. It has an extensive glossary of terms as well, so if you're new to this whole setting, I think it can be a good introduction. Not as organic as in Bloodlines, but could work. At full price, it's a bit expensive, but it goes on deep sale pretty regularly, and at that price, I think it's well worth it. I played through it 2 times, around 10 hours in total, and I feel like I've seen mostly every scene. But I could do a walkthrough with the 3rd clan and roleplay completely differently, and I'm sure I would see a lot of new stuff. And it's worth exploring these scenes just for the art alone. You probably already have an opinion about it just by looking at this footage, but I specifically really like the character portraits. They are very expressive of everyone's personality, and the background environment art and atmospheric music together create a very, very good vampire mood. I think overall it's a really good game. You can buy both the art book and the soundtrack of the game as separate DLCs as well. And Coteries of New York has a standalone expansion too that continues the story, but unfortunately it does not meet the bar set by the base game. Shadows of New York came out almost a year later in September 2020. It was still the height of the pandemic, and it's even written into the story. It's very interesting. Anyway, it works almost exactly like the base game, and it follows the story shortly after the first game concludes. There are returning characters, and the background art is the same sometimes, but it takes place in the same general area, so I thought this was fine. There's a new protagonist now, and this time you don't get to choose. She will be Lasombra. The story starts out as her being human, she gets embraced, and then she starts trying to find her place in the Camarilla. So it's similar to the first game, but this time it's much more straightforward. There's much less real choice that affects the story. There are quite literally only 5 choices that matter, and I think it's completely baffling that the game works like this, so I have to explain. So you don't get to choose your character, so the way role-playing works in this game is you get traits after certain conversations. These are not really big choices, but indicate the values your character holds. And in-game it says, these will push Julia towards different ways of thinking, which will have a lasting effect on her throughout the story. And so you will collect these and wait for their effect, but nothing happens ever, except when you have to make the last choice of the game. In the last scene, in the most tense moment, at the narrative peak of the story, you do not get to make the decision. Julia will make one based on what the game thinks she would do based on these traits. So what the description of this system doesn't tell you, all these traits do or give is points for which ending you get out of the 2, good or bad, and they have no other purpose whatsoever. So what could happen at the end is she will make a decision that you don't want her to make, and you know it is the bad decision and you want to choose the other one, but you said something completely unrelated to your girlfriend in a completely different conversation 3 hours ago, so the game just assumes control and messes everything up. I said this before, and I'm all for delayed consequence when it's done right and makes sense. but here I was genuinely stunned by how stupid this felt. If I say something mean to someone and that comes back later as a disadvantage because that person hates me now, that makes sense. Saying something once to someone without thinking much, predetermining me to have the exact same reaction to every situation, to everyone from that point, just doesn't work. This would be like I'm loyal to my partner in my private life, so I gain the loyal trait, and now I never ever change jobs however shitty my boss is because I'm loyal. It just doesn't work like that. Especially since the main character is a Lasombra who are uniquely ambitious, so maybe I wanted to roleplay her as someone who uses others and lies to them to gain an advantage. So she would say something to someone and contradict it to someone else to further her own goals. But I never got to make that decision. The game and the hidden points it gave me made it for me. This loss of agency at the most crucial decision felt terrible to me and completely ruined the whole experience. I got the bad ending at first, and after I did not understand what happened, I looked it up, skipped through the game a second time and got the good ending as well, but at that point I was checked out. Another big reason for that was throughout the game, the writing is very different from the first game. That sense of moody, high-level power politics of the Camarilla is gone. There are returning characters, but these big schemers you've met in the first game feel like completely different people. Their plans are amateurish and they fall to a freshly turned neonate incredibly easily. Like there were scenes where I was winning and all I could think of is why the hell would an elder vampire who was an important figure in this city for who knows how long be so incompetent all of a sudden as to fall for a 2-month-old baby's tricks. They all seem to have one personality, and it's mostly to make the player character feel like an investigative genius. Even the good ending felt weird for this reason, like how are we suddenly winning against all these people who supposedly rule this criminal organization for literal centuries? Oh, and the little internet speak one-liners are turned up to 100, and a lot of the characters speak like someone straight out of a Twitter thread for some reason. Here it's more off-putting than the base game, it's just too much. There are parts of it I liked. The art is amazing, I'd say even better than in the first game, and the music tracks are still phenomenal. There's even an ambient playlist on the official YouTube channel that has songs from these two games that has the animated backgrounds playing. This part really is a standout in both games, and I like the idea of playing as a Lasombra, even if the implementation of it is not as good as it could be. Shadows of New York goes on a very deep sale quite frequently, and you can even buy it in a bundle with the base game. It's interesting and has some really good sections, but unfortunately I did not think it hit the same level as the base game. It's very short too, I played through it twice and have all the achievements, and my playtime is 5 hours. And maybe the reception of this expansion was not the best, because the developers are working on something completely different now. And after them, another company took over the Vampire the Masquerade game releases for a while. Next up is 4 interactive text-based games published by Choice of Games. They are a company focusing on these interactive novel types of stories, and if you like this stuff, they have a lot of them to choose from. The first thing you wanna do when launching one of these games is immediately turn on dark mode, but otherwise I think the system that Choice of Games made works greatly for Vampire the Masquerade. They have their own programming language to help the writers produce these titles. This makes them also easily portable to mobile, so if you'd prefer, most of these games are available on iOS or Android. I haven't played these on a tablet, but I'd imagine it would be even more like reading a book in bed. This choice script development means that most of these games look and play mostly the same. But there are still meaningful differences between them, besides the story itself, so I go through each one by one. I play some random footage in the background as well, as to keep your attention, because visually there's not much going on in these. The first vampire game released in this choice of games framework is called Night Road. You are playing a delivery driver for the Camarilla in the American Southwest. And from the start I just loved this setting. A lot of Camarilla stories take place in huge urban environments like in New York. And this road trip feeling, especially set in Arizona, makes it instantly 100 times more interesting to me. Not to go full America Boo, but my favorite YouTube video ever is this one, where they travel through the Lincoln Highway from LA to New York, and this game made me feel like I'm traveling these type of landscapes as well. With the added vampire politics, I think even just the idea of this game is outstanding. And then, luckily, the idea is coupled with a very competent writing, so the execution, the pacing, and all the adventures are all really captivating and interesting. The whole game is around 600,000 words, so you can have a lot of these adventures and go through them a lot of different ways. Obviously, you will not be able to see all of these in one playthrough, but because of the sheer amount of possibilities, it's really worth it to try and start a second time as well. These are the clans you can choose from in the base game, and you can buy a few more as DLC too. You can be gay, you can be non-binary. There's a lot of variance in how you can build the concept of your character. And what's more, and this is what makes these games games instead of just interactive novels, there are stats that influence how your choices turn out greatly, and items and equipment, just like in any RPG. The stats are based on the 5th edition rulebook, but I'm not sure if it's a one-to-one adaptation. I think it's not, but I could be wrong. Throughout the game, there will be times where in the narrative you have 1 or 2 off days, so you'll have time to go to the library to increase your intelligence-based skills, go to the club to increase social-based skills, or go to the pawn shop to buy equipment. I think it's a really great way to increase the immersion that these power-up sections are actually incorporated into the story with the flavored text and everything. There are also side quests, so if you want to have a human retainer, you can choose from a few different people throughout the story, and you can do their storyline and have a goal if you want to. Or you can skip it altogether. You can romance people, or you can just focus on the mission. There's really a staggering amount of writing in this game, and the DLC even adds a completely new, bigger side quest. That's one of the best stories in the game in my opinion. And since it's text-based, it's not really restrained by what's possible graphically, it's all just text on the screen, so the writer can really put you in very distinctly different sets of situations. They do have art sometimes throughout the game though. When the most important NPCs are being introduced, there's always a character portrait for them. I don't really think these were necessary, the text easily stands on its own, but it adds a cool visual style to the game that is really high quality. If nothing else, it makes remembering the many characters an easier task. There is no sound at all during any parts of the game, so you can listen to the atmospheric mixes on the Vampire YouTube I mentioned before, or listen to your own music, or if you're very normal like me, just listen to your preferred background noise. The challenge of the game comes from knowing your build, that is the skills you've chosen to develop, and knowing what situations it can handle. A lot of the choices will have skill checks behind them to determine if you're gonna succeed or not, and you'll know which skill it will use based on the wording of the choices. So for example, this one is probably charisma, this one will be stealth, this is willpower, etc. You can also just turn on storyteller mode, which will have the required skill in brackets, but I think it's more fun to try to figure it out based on the wording. And there's always a lot of choices to handle every situation. I never felt locked into certain actions I didn't want to do. So for example, coming up against a boss, you could obviously fight them, but you could try to convince them, try to deceive them, or even just try to run away. I always play a character that's not good at fighting, but I never got into anything I couldn't solve with my chosen skills. The writing really covers all the angles. If you fail a check, there will be no indication, but you will be able to tell from what happens in the story that you were not successful. But I never really encountered any game over state. You can probably get your character killed if you get into fights you can't handle, but if you play the game trying to survive, it will not be unfair to you. Overall, out of all 4 of these novel type games, I think I like this one the best. I can't really think of anything I would change or improve, and I really recommend checking this out if you're interested in the setting. There's an extensive journal as well, so I think it's good for beginners too. At full price, it's not that expensive, and even if you buy the DLCs, it's not that bad, and I think it's worth it a lot. I think you should buy the Secrets and Shadows one that adds Nosferatu and Lasombra, and that really good side quest I mentioned. I always play as Lasombra if I can, so this was well worth it for me. The other one, Usurpers and Outcasts, only adds Tremere and Caitiff, so if you don't plan on playing as one of these clans, you can skip this, I think. The next installment in these novel-like games is Out for Blood, and it's a very different setting from Night Road. It's a small rural town. Your character is a human who comes back here to sort out their inheritance after their grandfather died and left a small shop to them. You meet your childhood friends and acquaintances, but the big twist is you are human throughout the game. So opposite to the New York games, where you get embraced to be a vampire in the first few minutes, here you will play as a human in this small town who discovers the existence of a vampire population hidden in their small community. There are some technical differences to Night Road. The journal is called Paths and References and not as comprehensive. You can flirt with almost everyone you speak to, so you have more options there. There's money management here as well, but it never really ends up being meaningful. It's just there alongside the shop management, which doesn't have any effects to the story either. The experience point screen where you level up is also just inserted into some places. It's not really written into the narrative as in Night Road. The writing felt very different as well. The pacing was somehow off for me. There was so much town gossip and details about people who never really became important or interesting. A lot of sections felt like they were just meandering endlessly. And believe me, I know exactly what meandering is. And this applies to the overall story as well. It starts out really slow. And even though it's much shorter than Night Road, it takes around 2 hours to get to the first real vampire encounter. And this is where I think the reason is why I didn't like it. There's an interview with the writer and he talks about how he likes the Second Inquisition and Hunter storylines because that's what he finds interesting. I'm the complete opposite. I like the Camarilla stories and the organized crime type of internal politics of these organizations. I want to work against the Hunters and I'm not interested in their point of view, usually. We are playing a setting called Vampire the Masquerade after all. But okay, maybe I'm interested in precisely one vampire hunter. I also don't like small town horror, and I don't like the "what? There are vampires" type of narratives. I as a player already know that there are vampires here, let's just get on with what's important. But for this game, the human side is what's important. So I would recommend this one if you're interested in how regular humans deal with the mysterious, unexplainable events. The prevalence of anemic people, how they would react to meeting a vampire, how would they organize a hunt if they would at all, or would they maybe try to side with them against other humans. If this sounds interesting to you and you like small town horror, I think you'll like this game. It was just not for me at all, but I think that's okay. It's not bad by any means, it just deals specifically with topics I'm not at all interested in. But the next game using the Choice of Games framework goes back to high-stakes Camarilla politics, which is exactly the thing I like in Vampire the Masquerade. And this time your character is already established within the organization. You are well known, you have your own apartment and butler and everything. It takes place in Canada, and in the beginning you learn that the prince of the city goes missing and nobody knows what happened. And throughout the story, that's what you will have to find out. The mechanics of the game mostly work the same as the 2 previous games as well, but there are some minor changes. So for example, here you level up skills through memories, where at certain points your character will remember past events from their life and you decide exactly how they happened, which in turn raises your relevant skills in the present. Like here, if you say you've spent your time perfecting fighting techniques, you raise strength and stamina, which is a cool way again to make these level up sections be a part of the role playing. You also have the storyteller mode here, where the required skills for a check are displayed, but another addition is how you can turn on bookmark mode, which allows you to rewind to the beginning of your current chapter if you don't like the choices you've made. Previous games auto-saved constantly without being able to rewind, so this is a big quality of life feature for those who want it. The story I thought was pretty good. It's up there with Night Road, the pacing was very well done, and the build-up and payoff of the big final scene is really masterful. I got the ending I wanted exactly, but you'll most likely not get an answer for everything in one go. There's a lot of content and different paths. I looked up a few other ones, and it's wild the things you can do. It has a DLC again with a few other clans and some added story content, which is well worth it in my opinion. Maybe this one is a bit more complex for a completely new player, so I still recommend Night Road over this one for someone new, but overall I think both are great. The last one of these games is Sins of the Sires, which is the only one that's mixed on Steam, and for me is also the one that I did not really enjoy. The setting is really interesting. It takes place in Greece and you play as a caitiff who are vampires without a clan. But the story doesn't really do anything interesting with either of these parts. It was really hard for me to grasp how the scenes follow each other. It felt like things just happen for plot reasons, not as a natural consequence of the previous actions. And the writing itself has two big problems in my opinion. There's a lot of times when sentences just don't make sense, like this paragraph. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust, but then you see it. The dark, unmistakable shape. A body huddled over another body, a pale neck flashing faintly in the light of the monitors, the sound of blood leaving a body and entering another. Like, huh? What does that mean? And I remember pausing a lot of times during the game trying to decipher the wording. It's full of these mental images that instead of conveying the visceral action of the scene, just made me confused. The second thing that bothered me was, and it was present a little bit in the previous quote as well, writing in very short sentences to convey a sort of sinister, evil atmosphere. I've noticed this in tabletop role-playing of Vampire the Masquerade as well. When people want to sound more serious and thoughtful, they start to speak in short sentences with long pauses. I think this never works and it just makes you look silly, and this game is full of this. Like when you're building your character in the beginning and you choose that you fixed computers in your life before turning. And then the game reads, nothing fancy, nothing dangerous, just an ordinary life. But you were good at it. Better than most, smart, inquisitive. People called you the Laptop Whisperer. You are not that person anymore. I hope it's understandable what I mean. This type of writing doesn't work, and in the rare cases it does, it's only in very specific situations, used sparingly. And again, this game is full of this. Overall, this was a very disappointing experience, and I would only recommend this game if you want to play all the vampire games like I did for this video. I completed it in 2 hours, which for the price I felt was very short, even on top of the shortcomings of its writing. I think what's there is a good base though, which after heavy editing could be a really good story. But I felt like it needs a lot more work to be on the level of the other 3 games of the Choice of Games series, which we'll leave behind after these 4 and move on to the next project in the Vampire IP. Only a few weeks after Sins of the Sires, the IP continued with Heartless Lullaby. It's a game made in 1 month for a vampire-themed game jam that was later published on Steam for free. It was developed by a small team in a short time, so most of the characters in it are just the default 3D model guys, and the credits mostly consist of the attribution for the freesound.org effects used. And as such, it's not really a full game, more like a prototype or a proof of concept. And it really works, which is really a testament of how well the devs utilized these limited resources they had. It worked so well that it will be developed into a full game, with this short section being the prologue. So you play as a random human on a night out with a friend. You get into a club and you meet increasingly sus characters and get entangled in a local vampire conflict. You'll also control a vampire girl already entangled in this conflict, and the point of view alternates between these two main characters throughout the game. The gameplay is basically Disco Elysium, and before this I never really realized how well this format matches with the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing setting. You'll have your skills and disciplines, and certain dialogue options will require a roll, just like in Disco Elysium. Here, the dialogue box is on the other side of the screen though, which seems minor, but it was deliberately placed in Disco Elysium.
We decided to put the center of gravity, or where your eye is drawn, to the bottom right of the screen. I personally think it was a very intelligent decision, so I like to talk about it at length. If you're using a computer, this is where you look 60% of the time. The screen weight is always on the bottom right corner. This is where your clock is, where your tray is, where your messengers are usually. The human being is most used to looking at the bottom right corner where their hand is, the right hand.
But yeah, whatever. I just like mentioning Disco Elysium trivia. Anyway, for me, every role in a conversation was a success, however likely they were based on the percentage. But maybe this is because of the prototype nature of the whole thing. I failed only one role, but that was for story reasons and scripted to fail, I think. There's also a Witcher Sense radar type of thing to find the interactable objects nearby. The music in the game is only 2 songs looping, and as I've said, the sound effects come from a free sound effects site, so there's not much to say there, they work fine. But the graphics work really well, even though the scope of the items and models are very limited. The collab's atmosphere comes through clearly, and the characters have a clear, distinct visual personality as well. It feels like the old CRPGs, where there was not much there in terms of graphics, but you could clearly imagine what the characters and locations would look like. The whole thing is very charming, and you can definitely see the vision of the devs throughout the game. And there's weird dancing in the club too, so the Vampire the Masquerade mode is impeccable. Again, it's free and around 45 minutes, so not really a full game, and I don't know if I'd recommend it. But if you're interested in a prototype of these influences mixed together, I think you should definitely check it out. The trailer for the follow-up looks really good too, and given the budget and time, I really think this project could turn out to be very, very good. I'm very excited what they will cook up as the full game. Okay, I was dreading this since the initial idea for this video, but luckily since then they discontinued ongoing development, and therefore I don't really have to take it as seriously. It's not an ongoing game anymore. An online battle royale is not my type of game, but as this video is about all the vampire games, my plan is to just play one game and move on. To start off, you have to register, of course, to their service, but at least it's not a separate launcher. You'll go into an Elysium lobby where you can queue up and meet with other people. There's a bunch of game modes. I played the solo battle royale one, and honestly the gameplay itself is good. The movement is fluid, the animations look nice, there's Assassin's Creed jumping and wall climbing, which looks cool and feels great to do. The map is atmospheric and full of character itself. The visual design is surprisingly detailed. You can pay attention to shops and signs around the city, and everything looks like a lot of effort was put into making these elaborate and good to look at. I think the city itself was my favorite part of the whole thing. The level design, the atmosphere, the lighting, and the great views are all fantastic. I couldn't really say much about the Battle Royale aspect itself. I came in second on my only round, but most opponents were bots, I think. And honestly, I have no idea what I was doing, and I have no real intention to learn how to play a Battle Royale. As far as I understand it, it wasn't any different from the few rounds of PUBG I played with my friends. So if you like Battle Royale games, you'll probably feel right at home. You play as a vampire though, and you can feed on civilians to gain minor buffs based on their resonant blood, which I thought was a cool idea to implement this concept from the tabletop game. The whole time I was playing, I thought, why isn't this an action RPG instead? Well, I know why.
Hello, I like money.
But Fortnite turned from an unsuccessful game into a widely popular battle royale, and they need to do a reverse Fortnite on this game, where they take an unsuccessful battle royale and turn it into something else, because the gameplay, the art, the UI design is all very good, but it's trapped in a format that seems to not be able to generate much interest. I really don't understand who the target demographic was here. For me, Vampire is about the interpersonal maneuvering and exploring the delicate nature of the masquerade and what it means to a complex, secret society of immortal beings. None of this is here. We are just shooting each other on the rooftops of Prague. Turning this setting into an action game is certainly a choice I cannot comprehend. It's like Star Trek, where they had a sci-fi show about a utopian, accepting, peaceful society and space exploration that many people liked, and they turned it into a bleak, evil action setting for no apparent reason. Again, I know the reason, but still. But this game also came years late to a trend where everyone wanted to play battle royales. It's almost like making a MOBA years late and then cancelling it shortly after because it didn't become the next League of Legends instantly. But I digress. Anyway, I don't want to be overly cynical about it. These types of games where it feels like an attempted quick money grab just make me sad. And there's really no point in listing the things it's not. Bloodhunt is a multiplayer battle royale game with a shop and battle pass. If you like this type of thing, I guess it exists and it's free, so that's something. But this is really not for me. Let's just move on to the next game. Swansong came out the same year and it initially looked very promising. An RPG similar to Bloodlines, where you have to investigate and use your vampire powers in the world to help you and navigate complex social situations, and then it came out and I saw the terrible review scores mentioning a lot of bugs and a myriad of other problems, and I just never bothered to try it out around release. When I bought it for this video, I was prepared for the worst, a terrible game and a miserable experience. But honestly, I ended up actually liking it quite a bit. But it definitely has a lot of issues, maybe the main one being the animation, so let's start with that. So if you look at stills from the game, it looks okay. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it does look good for a AA game. However, when you see the characters start to move...
So this is where you've been hiding.
Oh, Jesus, it's you. You scared the shit out of me. How did you find me?
You're really bad at covering your tracks.
Are you alone?
What the hell is going on?
Oh my. And you can't even blame it on its age, it came out recently. I genuinely can't comprehend what happened here. Like, it's fine during gameplay, the running animation is okay, but it's impossible to miss during cutscenes how unsettling the movements are. The facial animations are completely off and devoid of all emotions, or they display an emotion that shouldn't be there. And the body movements are so unnatural and robot-like that it really takes you out of whatever is happening on the screen. And even though during gameplay it's mostly fine, it happens there as well. Like, this is not how a person looks at something, bending their whole torso. The characters got the GTA 3 type of floaty movement. It's really not a good look for a game released in 2022. It's really jarring at first, and paired with the many small visual bugs and glitches for a while, I genuinely thought this game might have benefited from being one of those text-based games. It feels like they were overambitious with this project, and they clearly didn't have the time and the budget to polish these animations. I got used to it in the end, and now I think it's kind of funny, but I can definitely see how this part turns people off immediately. But other than that, I think the visual style of the game is great. Everything related to design is wonderful. The maps and environments are intricate and full of life. They are interesting to explore and varied in their style. There's a high-class apartment building, a nightclub, a military base, office interiors, and all of these look great. They are almost always filled with an impressive amount of elaborate details, and these seem to have a lot of thought put into them. Like in the apartment of a business person, there are business books on the shelves. During the gameplay, you will have to find a lot of items and documents in these environments, so you really have to take a comprehensive look through them. And I never really thought this part got boring. If anything, these maps are so detailed and realistic that it's actually hard to differentiate between the quest items and the decorations sometimes. And the character designs are also wonderful. I really liked how all the important people in the story were portrayed. They had clear visual personalities, which adds a lot to the whole game, even though the animations unfortunately cheapen this sometimes. I really like the UI design as well. There are nice animations and a lot of really useful menus too. For example, at the end of every mission, you get an overview screen of the things you've done, but there's a section that lists the things you've missed. So if you want to replay these, it's much easier to figure out what you should be doing differently. There's a glossary with all the terminology of the setting, but you have to tab out of conversations to look at these, which is very disrupting to the flow of gameplay. And I think you'll be quite confused about the details of what's going on if this is your first entry to the whole vampire setting. There's a lot of times where the writing of these UI elements is frustratingly ambiguous. So for example, when an option says force open the door, and without any previous warning, it just breaks a one-time use item in your inventory without any confirmation window. Maybe I should have used it somewhere else, but now I'll never know. And you can really mess these things up, even accidentally with a misclick, because you cannot do manual saves. The game just auto-saves very frequently and you'll have to live with the consequences or replay the whole mission, which could mean hours of backtracking. So most of the time, if I failed something, I just rolled with it, even if I didn't want to do it that way. And there are other time wasters as well. When you realize you need something from the beginning of the map and you have to run all the way back, why not make the puzzles more concise? Or when I realized I needed something from an earlier part of the map to do something optional, but it's not possible to go back now. Why is this good? And there are a lot of puzzles too that feel incredibly obscure and for me at least impossible to figure out. You can look up the solutions, sure, but then the whole point of the gameplay is lost. On the other hand, you might spend hours looking for that one specific thing you need to progress in a way you'd like, replaying and replaying until you get it. Neither of these choices are good, but a small consolation, I guess. Sometimes even the character thinks the puzzles are stupid.
Oh, come on. There's more.
I think the goal was with these to give your decisions and the exploration itself more weight and consequence. But it just feels awful to miss something, figure it out, and be unable to solve it on that run. You have to redo everything. I like puzzles generally, but the way they were done here was very frustrating. Another thing that takes away from the supposed weight your choices should have is how the skills work. You gain experience from the objectives you complete, and you can spend these to either level up your disciplines, like teleporting or copying an NPC's uniform.
Well done, 47.
Or the skills themselves. These will come up in conversation, and if you have the required level, you can use them. However, if it's a tie, a dice roll will decide if you succeed or not, which I guess wants to mimic the feeling of the tabletop experience, but here it doesn't work and it feels terrible to lose to RNG in important moments, without the option to do anything about it. In my video about Pentiment, I said the checks work because it makes sense that someone would be mad at you for a thing you said, even if you did not notice offending them. Here, it's not the human element of the character you missed, you just didn't know you will need a 5 in persuasion to convince this person. There's no setup, you couldn't play carefully to set yourself up for success. You just have to know the build you need for specific conversations, and if you don't have that build, GG. And this is especially true for boss fights, which are confrontational conversations in this game. These consist of a number of debate-type back-and-forth dialogue options, and you have to win a set number of them to win the boss fight. This is a great concept, but these are also reduced to RNG and the fact whether or not you knew what skills will be needed, which just makes them feel unsatisfying most of the time. Speaking of unsatisfying, the story can be really good or really bad, depending on the roles you can win, and the cryptic and complicated secrets you can find. Because a lot of the coolest parts of the story, the biggest reveals and most emotional story moments, for some reason, are locked behind incredibly hard to find minute details. I genuinely don't think anyone will be able to get the best ending or the ending they want without looking up a guide. These twists and secrets are actually really smart and create a great story. And I really don't understand why they would hide it from the players behind cryptic puzzles and random rolls. For example, at the end, what decides if an important character lives or dies is if the player character has a level 4 in one of the disciplines. And you could have done everything perfectly up until that point, but if you don't have it accidentally or read this in a guide, this character is just dead. Like, why? The story starts with someone attacking a party of the Camarilla, and you will control 3 characters affiliated with the organization to try to figure out who did it. Their story will of course intertwine throughout the playthrough, and I think this part works really well. It gives the whole story a very unique pacing, and you'll get to know the world from a few very different points of views, and will get to interact with the world through their particular powers. Most of the characters you meet are interesting, even if they sometimes say some out-of-character stuff.
Do you have a backup plan?
Caleb, you won't fail. You're our only hope. We place all our trust in you to complete this essential mission.
Like a prince of the Camarilla of a big city wouldn't plan so amateurly as to put all their future plans on one guy. But I guess she could be lying to him, but I don't know, sometimes characters say weird stuff. And not just that, they say it weirdly too.
Blood. Kinds were killed here.
So yeah, the voice acting is just a hit and miss too. Sometimes it's really good.
The prince will decide your fate when the time comes. Being useful to her can't hurt. How do you feel about it?
Sometimes it's, well...
Don't play that game with me.
But it's the truth.
If you're of no use to me, then there's no point in keeping you alive.
What? No! Alright! I can help you. Just don't hurt me.
I'm listening.
Or when you learn some big news, but the voice acting is just so flat.
Hello? You. It's about damn time. Shit. What? You're... Hello? Damn it! I lost them.
Or sometimes the character's voice is just completely missing.
He took one look at the carnage and acted like it was just another day at the office. Examine the spatter trajectories.
But fortunately, there are some memorable quotes too.
There's still a traitor among us.
Overall, I like the game, and I would say it's worth the price when it's on sale. But before you decide to try it out, you have to understand that objectively, it's bad. I just like this type of junk in games where nothing works quite as it should, but something underneath it all is really compelling. I really think the game has some exceptional story points, even if they are hidden behind incomprehensible puzzles, good graphics and visual design, even if it's dragged down by the animation, and a great atmosphere that's a good representation of the tabletop game. The dialogue can be nonsensical sometimes, and individual story elements can be often weak, but the interactivity, the many paths you could take, and the secrets you find really tie the narrative together. Playing this felt similar to the Call of Cthulhu game that came out a few years ago, if this means anything to you. For me, that was also a very fun game that I liked, and it was objectively bad in many aspects. Swansong is a very contradictory experience in a lot of ways, but in the end, I'd give it a it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I really liked some parts of it out of 10. And with that, we are at the last game that was released as of the writing of this video. And it's a VR game that's only a few months old. It came out in November 2023, and for the most part, it's a stealth game. You play as a Banu Hakim. The stereotype about them is that they are assassins, and the game fits into that, as it's closest to something like Dishonored or an Assassin's Creed. The missions are generally like retrieve this item from the enemy base, kill this target, etc. With bonus objectives like don't get detected or don't take any damage. And it's an actual game that's pretty involved. not just a VR on-rails movie through some set pieces type of thing. You have many different abilities to eliminate the targets, or sneak past them, or even a dart shooter that has many functionalities, like putting people to sleep. Maybe I'm prejudiced against VR games, but I was expecting that easy walking simulator gameplay I mentioned before. The last VR games I played were back when PSVR 1 was released, and I played this one on the PSVR 2, and a lot of things have changed since then. Back then, VR games were mostly stand in one place and look around types of short experiences. Maybe shoot a few times, but that's it. But again, Justice plays like a regular game with free movement, which is completely new to me. And while exploring and moving around, you'll have to do a lot of climbing as well, which you also have to imitate physically. Crouching in a tunnel is crouching IRL, etc. This took a while to get used to. One thing is the motion sickness, which is pretty strong for someone new to this type of thing, so I had to take breaks every 20 minutes or so. It got better every session, but it's still so uncomfortable how involved your body is throughout the actual playing. I don't know about you, but I like to chill max and be rot-pilled while I'm gaming, and I don't think I can get used to this whole thing. There are pretty intense boss fights and encounters where you have to react fast. But in a VR setup, that doesn't mean a button press, it means actually lifting your arm and shooting them first, and IRL physically dodging out of the way of something. I get that this is the whole point of VR, I just want to say I didn't get used to it throughout the 4-ish hour playtime I had with this game. This is coupled with the imprecise nature of controls, like grabbing onto things doesn't always work, or the character just slides off the ledges, so you fall down and have to do the section again. It makes getting into the world as a non-VR player kind of challenging. The game is beautiful though, the art direction is very strong, and every environment I've been to is gorgeous. And it's really elevated by the headset because you are in those locations, not just looking at them through a flat screen. It takes place in Venice, so you'll see a bunch of canals, but you go into houses and a bunch of other types of environments later on. You're walking and jumping and climbing and teleporting around, you're using your skills on NPCs, and it really gets you into the point of view of a supernatural assassin. You have to catch rats with your hands and hold down the NPCs and lean into their necks to feed. It's a very unique experience to do these things in VR, and I think the game really shines in these areas. There are some light role-playing elements too. You can choose to be nice or aggressive during conversations, but I didn't notice any obvious consequences of it. You also have a skill tree where you can spend experience. And there are a bunch of different types of skills, so you can really build your own version of the protagonist and play how you want to play, like a ghost or more bloodthirsty. The narrative is very, very light. I felt like it's more just there to tie together the gameplay somehow, but it was kind of hard to follow what was happening and who these people were. The Vampire the Masquerade terms are not really explained, so I'd imagine someone completely new would be even more lost. I mean, there are quest markers, so you'll know what to do, but why you're doing that is more confusing. There are some things that are weird in terms of lore, like you just leave corpses everywhere and killing is never really a problem, or how hunger is treated more like a mana bar and not a serious moral thing. It's just there, so you cannot cast disciplines indefinitely and not a narrative thing at all. But honestly, these are small things. The whole thing works well as a stealth game, and the fact that the lore is just there to support that is more of a feature, not a fault. It's a VR game first and the Vampire the Masquerade game second, and you have to keep that in mind if you want to try it out for yourself. In my opinion, this is not for people interested in the world of Vampire, more like for people already somewhat familiar with the setting who want to try out VR games as well. It did not convert me to be a VR gamer, but it was a really interesting experience, and I'm happy I got to see how much VR games evolved in the last 5 to 6 years. Okay, so that was all the games. In conclusion, which vampire game should you play? I'd say the best starting points are these two. Bloodlines is still the overall best experience. It explains the lore well, and you'll see a lot of different sides and factions of the setting. Its standing as one of the RPG classics is absolutely merited. If I had to rank the other games, I would do it like this. but it's probably different for everyone. Just decide based on what you've seen and heard in their respective sections. But once you're hooked, there's a bunch of other ways to keep up with Vampire. For example, the official YouTube channel has a bunch of tabletop campaigns you could listen to, and there are very good non-official ones as well. There's not as many as for D&D, but I'm sure you could find the best for you if you're into this kind of stuff. And obviously there are the tabletop books themselves. As I've said in the intro, there's a few different editions, and even inside these editions there's like a million books, so it could feel overwhelming to try to choose. There was a Humble Bundle recently where they sold all the 5th edition PDFs for very cheap, and it honestly added like a month to this video because I got completely consumed by reading all this shit. So why did I choose 5th edition? Well, besides it being in a cheap bundle. I gathered from the subreddit that if you're completely new, maybe 5th edition is the easiest to get into, which seemed to be perfect for me. And it's the most recent edition, so it's the one that's currently being updated and developed in the form of new books. So that's another big plus. But the biggest part is I like what they did with the lore. 5th edition takes place in our current day and age, and that means it comes with challenges vampires haven't faced before. Their society is based on secrecy and, well, the masquerade, and it's very interesting how they handle all the cameras, smartphones, internet, and a very advanced organization of mortals, etc. But if you want to play a tabletop game set in 1995, for example, that comes with its own set of interesting problems for the characters, and then you could play an older edition, or you could play even earlier. But I like the modern version, so I stuck with that. And let me recommend some books out of the ones I've read. So I fully read these so far. I started with the core rulebook and read the ones that were about the clans that are interesting to me. But do you need to do this? No, I don't think so. A specialty of these rulebooks is that they are full of world building and in-character fiction next to the tabletop rules. So if you've already played a few video games in the setting and you're familiar with the basics of the world and you're only interested in the lore, I think you could skip the core rulebook and just start with reading the companion books that seem interesting to you. If you want to play the tabletop version, obviously don't skip the core rulebook. The first supplementary book I've read was The Sabbat, and honestly it was my least favorite one. It's written in a very weird style. Remember when I said I don't like when people talk very over-dramatic with big words to sound more vampire-like? This book has a lot of that exact thing. For example, it's possible, though exceedingly rare, for Sabbat to change their path of enlightenment after having been inculcated into one. It's a process few accomplished vampires would court, but for those who see more potential in another path, changing the nature of one's monstrosity may offer them a chance at apotheosis. Or on the same page, does the wolf secretly yearn to live as a swine? Risible. Risible? I understand the intent. I think I would just prefer a less embellished wording. The content is interesting, but it was very hard to read because of this. The Cult of the Blood Gods, on the other hand, is the best Vampire the Masquerade book I've read so far. It's full of detailed lore, a very comprehensive overview of all the different cults of the vampire world, in-character fiction pieces, and even a detailed guide on how to create your own cult for your tabletop games. I really recommend this one. Maybe the only thing I didn't like is the parts that were supposedly handwritten in universe, but they chose such a completely illegible font. I just had to skip these parts because I have no idea how you're supposed to read this. But overall, I think the book is very good. The other three are mostly for specific uses. The Book of Nod is a completely in-universe book, a sort of Bible for the Vampire Society, and I think it's mostly good as a prop for your tabletop games, if you want to quote this word for word as a religious character, for example. But if you're interested in the creation myth of these beings, it might be worth it for you as well. The companion book is a short free book that expands on a few rules and clans, and also explains things like how to play as a human in the tabletop version. And the new Player's Guide is a detailed summary of the most important rules if you don't want to buy all the companion books separately to play as a clan that's not in the core rulebook. But these two books, I'd say, are mostly for tabletop players. And there are so much more to read and collect. If you start going down this road, you will really have a lot of good times ahead of you. There's a lot of free assets on the vampire site for you to just browse as well. And there's a which clan are you personality quiz and a Roll20 type site which is behind a paywall but has a lot of info about everything, a character creator, etc. There's also a lot of YouTube videos to watch about lore or the systems or anything related to the setting really. There are even other World of Darkness games too if you really want to immerse yourself in all this. And there are vampire games to look forward to as well. For example, I mentioned the Heartless Lullaby sequel/full game, which I'm really interested in. While writing the last part of this video, I was also playing Rogue Trader, and all I was thinking of is that this style of CRPG would really work in the vampire setting. Or you could even dream bigger and a Baldur's Gate 3 type of AAA RPG, a faithful adaptation of the tabletop rules and an astonishing amount of choices and ways you could complete the story. A Dragon Age or Disco Elysium type of game would really work for the World of Darkness. And as vampires seem to be very popular, I'm really surprised it hasn't been done before. What is being worked on is Bloodlines 2, and that whole thing would be worth a video of its own. It almost came out at one point, and then the development crumbled, important people left, and it looked like it was in development hell or straight up just abandoned. Recently, it was picked up by the Chinese Room, developers of Dear Esther, Amnesia Machine for Pigs, or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Now, a lot of people are concerned, since none of these are the types of immersive sim RPGs that the first Bloodlines is. Or maybe they even just hate their previous games. I'm cautiously optimistic, but honestly, I base that on nothing but blind hope. They seem passionate about the project, and it just feels better to think it will be good than to be a doomer about it before playing it. Maybe if these will be successful, it also opens up the franchise for more games in the future. But yeah, let's hope. So we're all the way at the end. We talked about the past, present and future, and if I had to summarize in one word how I feel about this franchise, is ambivalent. Every single aspect of it has some really high points and some really deep low points. No single piece of media I've seen from it was decisively and consistently good, and I find this fascinating. None of these games are good in the sense an Elden Ring is good, where everything in the game works well together and throughout the whole thing it's the same level of quality. The best one of these in my opinion, or at least my favorite, Bloodlines, is one of the best RPGs ever, and at the end it just devolves into nothing. The last 10-20% is just suffering for me to get through, even though it's one of my favorite games ever. But the ones that could be considered overall bad, like Swansong and Sires, have some really good parts and very memorable moments. And this is true for the books as well. Most of these have some very good parts and some really bad parts, and that makes recommending anything wholeheartedly pretty difficult. But I still like this setting a lot, and I hope I succeeded in summarizing these games well enough so that you could make your own decisions about them, regardless of my opinion and recommendation. But I do hope that in the future they will make a game that's actually unambiguously just very good. In the meantime, we are here with these games that are interesting in themselves precisely because of their flawed nature. They make you reflect on what you think about writing and game design, and I think they are worth a look just for that. But maybe you will get absorbed in the world and lore like I did and find your next obsession in this setting. I think it's worth a try. I haven't really decided on the next video yet. I think it's going to be a shorter one, but I always say this and then read a million related articles and books, which always complicate things. While you wait for it though, if you haven't already, why not watch my Pentiment video I kept mentioning? You too could learn about Andreas Pentiment and even learn why he would say this. Or comment here which vampire game is your favorite, or if you disagree with any of my opinions. I'd be really interested in different perspectives. But that's it for this video. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.